Welcome to the Table of Mentors. My name is Scott McLaughlin, and this podcast is about all things mentoring within Toastmasters. And the purpose of this podcast is to create a dialogue on mentoring within and outside of District 61. I am joined today by Scott Menez, Distinguished Toastmaster. Scott has been a divisional and area director. He's coached 4 clubs. He's been a Pathways and an Education Ambassador for District 61s. And he has also done workshops on evaluation techniques, spectacular speech presentations, and building strong mentor programs for different clubs. Scott has also trained District 81 in the Caribbean for establishing a mentoring program down there. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Scott, nice to meet you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Some feedback I always hear from other clubs is they bought into mentoring. They think it's a great idea. They think, yeah, it's definitely something we should do, but we don't have time to do it. We don't have the energy. We don't have the resources to do it. How would you respond to that? Is there a simple yet effective way of establishing a mentoring program that will not drain the energy or the morale of a lot of clubs?
Yeah, when we did the mentoring workshop, that was the number one point. A lot of clubs kind of face, executive burnout, and, the idea of taking on something else just seemed completely overwhelming. So this is my approach to it. The best way to start talking about mentoring is to forget about mentoring for a moment and just talk about how to build a great club. If you're planning to build a strong club and that's really your drive, then the first thing you would do is you'd sit down and say, okay, these are the components that we need for that to happen. So the first piece I'll introduce, especially around burnout, is the 80-20 rule, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with, which basically states 20% of what you do gives you 80% of the returns. Meaning, if you know what those high priority, high return activities are, and you can minimize all the other activities, then you're not trying to do everything. You're just trying to do the things that give you the best return. So this is vitally important. When you talk about burnout, it's usually because people are trying to take on too much, and maybe they're not clear on what those priority activities are. But once you define them, there's a real logic to it. And you can also, we'll cover some activities that kind of streamline how those priority activities get done.
Okay.
So the 80-20 rule, very important to remember the whole way through. I think it's called the Pareto effect or the Pareto rule or something like that. So big picture thinking first. How are we going to build a great club? What do we need to do? What are those components? Because once that's clear, then it's a lot easier to figure out how to align a mentorship program that supports that. So now if you think of, time spent, and especially positive influence time spent in a club or in your executive meeting, a lot of time is spent, trying to figure out how to make the club stronger. How are we going to get more members? How are we going to retain members because we're losing some of our experienced members? And a lot of time and energy can be spent just on trying to fix things. Yeah. So you can think of a mentorship program, especially if it's built in a very solid and simple way, as basically, preempting some of those problems instead of trying to fix them after they've happened. So you and I, let's say we're trying to get our PhD in building extraordinary clubs. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have great meetings, because when guests come in and they see a great meeting, it's so much easier for them to join. Or, the flip side is if guests come and you have a lousy meeting, there's a pretty good chance they're not coming back. So great meetings, that's one of the high priority components to it. The next thing is understanding pathways and conveying pathways to new members as they come in. And I'd have to say this is probably the number one problem for clubs in the district now. You can go through the whole, there's a big report card for the district that shows what every club has done, and it's pretty easy to see where the weak points are. And
Mhm.
clubs that haven't embraced pathways, you can see that almost no level 1 projects are being done. Sometimes the dynamic is experienced members are used to the old program. They're having a hard time embracing the new program. And so they're not passing on the knowledge that needs to be passed along. So the pathways piece is another essential component. How are you going to train new members in pathways? How are you going to help them to embrace that educational part of the program so that they're standing up and giving speeches? And the giving of speeches is another big picture bit of planning. Ideally in your meetings, you have 2 speeches every meeting, 2 speeches, 2 evaluations. Think about that. When a guest sees 2 speeches, 2 evaluations, they're thinking, oh, wow, this is what I came for. So when there's a weakness in the club and they're not doing speeches, then you're not seeing evaluations. And so it's very hard to build positive momentum that way. So this is another foundational piece. Also, you want to be building depth of knowledge in the club. So what this means is you really need to have an educational component to what the club does. That means maybe they'll give an educational speech on how to write a speech, or give an educational speech on motivational evaluations, that kind of thing. And when those pieces are handled at the club level, it makes it a lot easier because then the mentor doesn't have to cover it.
Right.
The club covered it, so it takes away one of the things that the mentor has to do.
Mhm.
Now, one thing that you should be aware of is that the district last year, or 2 years ago, I can't remember when we started the project, anticipated this. So there's content on YouTube about every single thing that a new member needs to learn. I know because I did them all. And,
Yeah.
some of them are, I think they're all worth listening to. And especially if you're a mentor and you're trying to learn some of those pieces, especially the pathways pieces, just watch them. They don't take that long to watch. I think the longest one is about 20 minutes. Typically, they were around 10 minutes. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And all those pieces are there. So it means you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. You can go watch those things, take from it what you need, and use that to help build a mentorship program. So to answer your initial question, if you align the mentorship piece with the running of the club, you'll actually save time. It won't take more time. It'll build a stronger club, and you won't be spending so much time trying to fix things. You'll be spending your time creating this positive momentum. That's the type of club that you want to belong to. So this will mitigate that burnout. People are going to meetings going, wow, this is great. I love this. That's the type of club you want to go to.
Yeah.
So again, you're not spending so much time fixing, you're spending time, building type
Sure.
thing.
So earlier you talked about the Pareto principle, the 80-20. What would you say those 20 activities or the 20% of the activities should be focused on to get the most bang for the buck?
Sure. So you do have to talk about how to build a speech. A lot of people come into the club and they come to get over speaking nerves, that kind of thing. But the reality is often people are nervous because they don't write well. And if you don't write well and you can't put your ideas in a logical order, it's very hard to get up and speak and then try to achieve that. So the writing piece is a big one. Now, again, if you felt, well, we don't really have a person in the club who can do that, that content is out there. And what some clubs did, which I thought was a great idea, is they would watch these videos on how to build a speech or whatever, and then they would talk about it. So that way they didn't have to create that content. They could watch the video on YouTube and then talk about it and then start implementing some of those things. It's really not a complicated thing, but it's one of those things where you don't know those fundamental basics. It seems very complicated.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think that's one of the challenges Toastmasters has in general is there's so much information. What do you cover? Where do you go?
totally.
there's so many versions. There's still versions of stuff out there from the old legacy program
Yeah,
still floating around. And I know prior to us meeting, you sent me some resources which I'll put in the links of this broadcast
sure.
so people can go and access those. Um, what do you find is missing within uh, mentorship within Toastmasters in general? Like, if I was to grant you absolute power, which is
Yeah.
always dangerous to do, but if you had absolute power within Toastmasters to institute any program, policy, or standards in regards to mentoring, what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, so this fits into your previous question as well. The big miss at the moment is pathways and explaining pathways. So think about this. If you were building a mentorship program and you're following the 80-20 rule, what are these essential things that you need to do? And what are the things you want to avoid doing? So the essential things are you have to give a new member an inspiring tour of Pathways. Pathways is our educational program. And to be honest with you, although it's a bit of a big step to, especially for experienced members to now try to master Pathways and figure it out, I would say it's well worth it. It's a great program, but as you said, there's way too much information. So a lot of the executive conversation should be around the 80-20 rule. Okay, there's too much stuff here. What is it that we really need to do? And let's focus on that essence. And if we want to extend that in the future, no problem. So for example, in a solid basic mentorship, you would be helping the new member get through level 1, and that's it. You don't need to show them level 2, 3, 4, or 5. Once they get through level 1, they've figured it out and they'll be able to move on by themselves. But what most clubs do, and if you went through the DCP report card, you would see very few clubs help the new member do this. So what happens is they struggle from the get-go. Nobody explains how to navigate this complicated pathways or seemingly complicated pathways. So it becomes too overwhelming. Then they don't participate and then they drop out of the club. That's a typical dynamic. But one of the things that we do in my club's educational program is we say, look, if you stick it out for 8 speeches, I promise you, you will create the change that you came to the club to change.
Absolutely.
Or to create rather. Yep. So they finally know, okay, it's 8 speeches, 8 projects. So 8 projects is basically level 1 and level 2. Now, any program that you take on, you need to learn these basic fundamentals in order to create change. So that's piece number 1. Piece number 2 is a lot of people come into the club with a fear of public speaking. And so it's important to let them know this fundamental, kind of kernel of wisdom that public speaking is not a natural skill that some people have and some people don't. Yeah. It's a learned skill, and you have to persistently learn it in order to be able to get up in front of a group and speak well. Typically, if you've heard a speaker who's really good, that's what they did. They may kind of hide that from you, but the truth is they were persistent. They learned the skills. They worked on it. They failed a few times. They gave a couple of lousy speeches that were embarrassing, perhaps, but they really persisted and they worked through it. And again, my goal for new members is make it to 8 speeches and you'll see the change that you're hoping for. So that's a pretty good thing to throw at a new member coming into the club. They go, oh, okay, I know, I'm going to try to give the 8 speeches. Let's see what happens type thing. So an ideal mentorship, again, helps that member through level 1, and then they'll take on level 2 by themselves because they already know, they know all the basics. They may need a little bit of mentoring through that, but so this is a great way to create a basic mentorship program. Just take the new member through level 1, teach them the meeting roles and how to get the most out of a meeting role. They don't always want to give a speech every week, so they need other activities, and the meeting roles are perfect for that. And teach them how to give motivational evaluations. So in the new Pathways program, you're there's an evaluation project that's almost right at the beginning. I think it's
Yeah.
the second project. So this is great because once you start realizing that you can react to feedback and build your knowledge through feedback, or if you're in these great meetings that I was talking about where you're hearing wonderful evaluations, you really start learning, oh yeah, that's a great point, or I could integrate that. So there's this positive, beneficial public speaking information. And the last piece I'd say is that typically a club has new members and they have experienced members. And however the program is built, it needs to support both of them. And that's the beauty of mentorship, because there are so many great soft skills you can learn by being a mentor that, if you think of the skills, you know, positive motivational evaluations for people who are learning and growing, helping people plan things in order to succeed. Like, these are exactly the skills you'd want in the workplace. So again, Toastmasters is about, it's this laboratory of learning, which I've heard so many times, but the skills you're practicing are the skills you take into the workplace. And I've had an opportunity to see that a whole bunch of times where, people from where I work, I convince them to join a Toastmasters group. And then I see them in the workplace and I go, wow, that made a huge difference. So hopefully you've seen that too. It's such a cool experience.
There's definitely a spillover effect. And darn it, Scott, you took my next question away
Oh, that's
about the
okay. No,
real.
ask it and all.
No, but I was going to ask you about kind of like a lot of people are hesitant to get involved in mentoring. To be a mentor, they feel they have to be with Toastmasters for 30 years, or they have to be a champion speaker. But there is a real life application, real world application to mentoring, and you kind of covered that.
Yeah, well, this is an interesting thing. In the Toastmasters groups that I've been in, one of them had a person who wanted to run the mentorship program for my company. And so I said, oh, look, you should join a Toastmasters group. We'll take you through the mentorship program there. So you could kind of test things out. And then you can take it back to the company and build the program from that, which is exactly what she did. So she joined a club. She worked through the mentoring pieces. She worked through the communication and leadership pieces for a year, and then went back to the company, presented her version of what a solid mentorship program would be in the company based on the Toastmasters learning. So that was fantastic and beautiful to see. Mm. Also, I would say there's two other people in my experience who took the mentorship program into the company that they work for. And they basically ran the program in the company and did an amazing job. One is a lawyer, and the other works for the Canadian Armed Forces, and he's building a mentorship program there, which is incredible. Yeah. So, but that's a great piece to think about too, is that if you think about your workplace, or anybody listening thinks about their workplace, if you had a solid mentorship program in the workplace, well, what kind of a difference would that make? And once you embrace the value of that, then you can see the same thing in a Toastmasters group. What kind of a difference can you make as a solid mentor? Yeah. If you view it as labor or something unpleasant, then you'll always see it that way. But when you if you learn the value of it and the soft skills that you'll practice and learn as a mentor, the value is incredible. Like I said, those are the people I want to work with. Those are the people who are positive and motivated. They're building their wisdom. Yeah. They're building their skills. Oh, there was one other piece actually that you reminded me of in your question, and that is that most people in Toastmasters who are strong on the education side and delivering educational speeches, they don't have a clue what they're talking about when they started. So don't think you needed to master something, 10 years of Toastmasters, and now I'm doing this. We don't come into the club knowing how to give motivational evaluations. We don't come into the club knowing how to run a mentorship program or any other aspect of Toastmasters. But what happens is you recognize a need. And if the need is, well, the club really needs to know how to write speeches better or create speeches. All right, I'm just going to give that educational. I'll do it the best I can. We'll get feedback, and maybe over the years I'll get better and better at it. But so what you're doing is you're filling the need, and
Yeah.
you're building your skills as you fill that need. I look at some of the educational speeches I gave in the past, and I think, okay, some of it was pretty good,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it could have been better. But the important thing is that someone stepped up and did it.
Yeah.
And then there's conversation around it and discussion and other people who are building on it. So again, it's about creating this incremental positive momentum. So yeah,
Yeah.
even if you don't know how to do it, dive in.
Yeah.
And in the mentorship structure, once someone finishes level 2, they can easily become a mentor to new members. It's a great thing to do, actually. It's kind of that teach to learn type thing.
Exactly.
If I can explain how to write a speech or how to create a speech, then, I'm building my skills at the same time type thing.
Perfect. Yeah. The one thing, at least for me, Toastmasters has done is you think you're going in for a specific purpose, but what you get is so much more than what you expected,
Totally.
or even
Yeah.
that you thought you were looking for it to begin with.
Yeah.
So what kind of influence have you had in regard to mentoring outside of Toastmasters?
Well, as I mentioned to you, there was this occasion where someone from my work who wanted to build a mentorship program was trying to figure out how to do it. So that was probably the most interesting experience for me, because I wasn't the mentor per se. Actually, I was her mentor. So that was interesting in itself. And I got to support it in the work environment as well. To be honest with you, it worked out beautifully. It was a type of communication within the company that I had never seen before, where senior managers were working with people just coming into the company. There was this great communication between different departments. There were all kinds of things going on well that were facilitated by the mentorship program. So I thought that was brilliant. And I also realized there was so much more that we could do, that, slowly and hopefully those things will evolve. I think any extraordinary company runs a solid mentorship program in one way or the other. Maybe they call it something else, but that's what it is.
Okay. So let's just say we're in a club, we have a mentoring program, we have mentors. What suggestions would you give to a mentor to keep their game sharp, to keep them on the ball as they're continuing on through Toastmasters and they're taking on the responsibility of stewardship for new members coming on?
Well, one important piece, I think, is that you integrate the mentor coordinator with the VP of membership. So the VP of membership should be the mentor coordinator, meaning when someone comes into the club, new member, they connect that person with an existing member, just to get through level 1. Some people say, well, you don't get credit for being a mentor coordinator, or how are you going to add one more task? But just align the task with the VP membership, which is exactly what they should be doing anyway.
Yeah.
Helping that person to get off the ground and that type of thing. The VP membership mentor coordinator can also make sure that all of the mentors have the same basic knowledge.
Yeah.
So this was the piece you were talking about. If you could control anything at the district level or at the grander Toastmasters level, what would it be? And it would be that there's this solid basic mentorship program exists to give to a mentor. So it's like, here's the training on these 5 or 6 things. Here's the, what you need to know to be a good mentor. And it doesn't need to be complicated, but the package should exist. We've had success in our club in that from a year-to-year consistency point of view, we're just building on what happened in the previous years, and it makes it easier and easier, and it's less and less time-consuming. So, sometimes the first year is kind of the tough year to get it figured out, but the second year goes so much better. So you need to kind of embrace that too. Getting it started will have a great ripple effect down the way, type thing. Did I answer your question, or did I go on a tangent
perfect.
as usual?
No. It was answered very, very well. Scott, I want to thank you for help demystifying the process of how to start up a simple yet effective mentoring program for our clubs. And I'm going to ask our audience, if you like the content, if you like it, and please share it if you think somebody can benefit from it. And really go back to your clubs and start having the conversation about mentoring as soon as possible. It's an investment that always returns on it. Scott, thanks for joining us. And thanks everybody for watching the Table of Mentors.
Thank you, Scott. Have a great day.
You too.